Welcome to the Ask It Basket with me, Justin B. of Rico 12, with Robert P. of The Recovery Guy, and with Whitney B., who's just amazing, and we love having her join with us in this conversation that we have, where we bring questions that are often brought up in recovery centers, rehab centers that Robert goes to, and we're gonna ask those questions, walk through them, and talk about why these things are so important in life, what it may be less important in recovery, and how we can apply these principles in all our affairs as we read in the 12th step. So anyways, Whitney, why don't you start us off? Introduce yourself. Tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get into these questions.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney B. I'm located down here in Orem, Utah, where I found some great recovery. I actually hit my year mark tomorrow, so it's a huge week for me, and I'm excited. Just loving living life and working in recovery down here, and looking forward to the podcast with you guys. Happy to be here.
How cool is that? One day at a time. Happy birthday tomorrow. So happy for you, and grateful to have you here with us, Whitney. Robert, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Robert Pardon. I'm a happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic, as my sponsor will would say. Normally, I just say I'm a recovered alcoholic, but you know, he and I've known him for 39 years of my recovery journey, and what a great friend he is. And so I'm just excited. Some changes are coming in my life, and as I was talking to you offline earlier, Justin, and Whitney already knows, everything begins with sobriety. If any of us, whether it's you, Whitney, myself, or anyone in the listening audience, everything begins with sobriety. Nothing would ever come before it, because when things become more valuable than my sobriety, then I lose sight of my sobriety. And so today is a great opportunity to get refocused, because I never want to be that 14-year-old experiencing alcohol who thinks that can make me a better version of me.
Yeah, Robert, and I think I want to start a question there, and it's not one that's on the list here, but I want to riff on that just a little bit. So we've got our substance addictions, we've got our process addictions. In substance addictions, sobriety is very black and white. It's am I using? Am I not? Am I drinking? Am I not? In some of the process addictions, sex addiction, food addiction, stuff like that, sobriety, it's still a black and white thing. And I think it should be a black and white thing. But what is the importance of sobriety, like complete abstinence in those in those process addictions for setting that baseline so that sobriety is everything? Does that question make sense? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is really profound and very helpful, because, I go back to my upbringing, and this is just for me. We didn't have much money. I was the middle of 7 children, blah, 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 all those things. We never had much food. So I didn't realize my food addiction was stemming from 8, 9 years old, searching the cupboards, looking for something to eat. When I found something to eat, I would eat as much as I could. Before I ever drank, when I was 10, 11, and 12 years old, at the onset of puberty, I remember digging a fort hole beyond our fence line and looking at Playboys. So my pornography addiction and my need to feel something other than what I was feeling was really evident even before I started drinking. So before I started drinking, that sense of loneliness and trying to fill it with food and objectifying women was already prevalent in my life. And you know what, Justin, I didn't even remember that. I mean, I put all those pieces together, but it just makes that question so profound. So my other addictions were set up even before my alcoholism, which was my true escape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And how does sobriety in those other things, how does that set the framework? Is it any different than what you're talking about with alcoholism?
Well, it's interesting, because when I came into recovery, the last thing I wanted to admit that I was alcoholic. I could give up the gambling. the throwing up, the pornography, the drugs were closely tied, but all those other things I found when I addressed my main addiction, which was alcoholism, all the other things became uninteresting. Once you remove the alcohol, which was my major nucleus or foundation of escape, then my need to escape to other things began to dissipate because they weren't consistent with the lifestyle I had chosen, which was necessary to not drink or use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that you said, once I addressed the alcoholism, and the alcoholism, for me, it manifests in process ways. It manifests
Yeah.
in sex. It manifests in porn. It manifests in food. It manifests in those processes. And sometimes, like I said, that abstinence line can be a little bit gray because, well, I have to eat in order to survive. Now, I don't have to eat certain types of foods. I don't have to eat certain amounts of foods in order to survive, but I do have to eat in order to survive. So it looks a little bit slightly different, at least in my experience. Whitney, what are your thoughts on that?
I kind of missed that last part. What was the main question to that?
Yeah, the main question was basically abstinence, sobriety. How, Robert launched us off with saying, hey, sobriety is kind of the foundation of everything that happens in our lives. And I asked about the difference between, process addictions and substance addictions, or the manifestation of alcoholism through processes or substances. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I do. Like you kind of mentioned, the baseline of it all is that ism. It's all comes through that alcoholism. And I claim to be an alcoholic, even though I am, I had a history with all sorts of drugs, other addictions as well. But I claim to be an alcoholic because of that ism, and so I completely understand the difference. I don't have many process addictions, so that's different for me. I can't speak much on that. But as far as the alcoholism, that's why I claim to be an alcoholic.
All right. I think that kind of sets a baseline. Robert, do you have anything else you want to say on that before we jump into some of these questions?
Yeah. And it's interesting. Father Martin in his chalk talk would say alcohol put to sleep things that would otherwise make me uncomfortable. So when I wasn't drinking or using, but I was engaging in Larry's Villa, strip joints, other things in my early sobriety, I was uncomfortable doing that. But when I drank, I was never uncomfortable doing anything. As an adulterer or, as a person who would lose a paycheck, I was never uncomfortable. When I got uncomfortable, I just drank more. When we addressed my core addiction, which was alcoholism, subsequently drug addiction, and I engaged in throwing up or pornography or gambling, I was uncomfortable. And I refused to get uncomfortable because I refused to drink. Does that make sense? So the other things made me uncomfortable to the degree that the only way to get comfortable was to drink, and that was off the table. So I subsequently learned how to stop doing these things just based on being uncomfortable doing them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it leads us into one of these questions that we have for today to address. And what I'd like to do is ask you this question, and maybe a lot of it's already been answered, but let's dive just a little bit deeper into it. This question is, why is it important that I stay clean off of all substances in this process? Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
Justin, again, another great question, and I come across that a lot. If anyone out there is a newcomer, don't think you have to clean your whole house at once. Address what is the biggest problem, and the other, in my experience in working with others, and certainly having God work on me. Once I started cleaning up the house, I would go one room at a time, and eventually my house would be clean. Conversely, if I make an excuse for one thing, I'll make an excuse for another. So if I make an excuse for pornography or gambling, and I'm and I get comfortable with that excuse, what's to stop me? Give a man an inch and he'll take a mile is the cliche adage of that. So I think once I open the door to complacency, the door begins to open because I begin to get comfortable with that. And that is true as my compulsive overeating. It's why, as a man, I avert my eyes from any woman that's not my wife. I don't, there's certain things I don't do because I don't want to get comfortable doing them, because if I do, then I'll get comfortable doing things I shouldn't.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Whitney, any thoughts on that question? Why is it important to stay clean off of all substances?
Absolutely. So I'll just track back to when I was in my active addiction, and I was caught up with the law, and I had all these reasons to stay sober, aside from the law. But my fight always was, hey, I need weed. I feel like weed helps me. I feel like I function better on weed. I feel like it, and it was all this reliance on this weed. But I think it was just keeping that back door open for me. I was just trying to keep that back door open. And
yeah,
sure enough, I mean, if I smoked weed for whatever it be, a week or a couple months, I always ended up finding time to do other substances. And so, I think for me, especially, and any true alcoholic out there, I think staying abstinent from every substance out there is absolutely critical to stay sober,
Yeah. And that's my experience also, but I really appreciated that walkthrough of I've got to clean the house one room at a time. If I'm going to go cold turkey off of everything at once without really having that the qualifying substance or behavior, whatever it is, solidified, I may, go right back to that qualifying substance because it's just a lot. I can't clean the whole house all at once. It's got to be room by room. All right. Let's look at another question that we have in here for this Ask It Basket. Whitney, when it comes to the 12-step program, why is a higher power so important? Let's start with you, Whitney, on that one.
Okay. Well, it is definitely so important. And, I didn't realize how important it was until I started working the steps and, kind of tracking that whole program. Personally, I think for me, like anytime I have my own will, I'm off to a rough start, and so having that higher power kind of gives you that thing to rely on. And a lot of the step work relies on letting go and letting it go to God and handing it over to God and having that faith in just how the universe works and how God works and hoping that it all aligns the way it does. And as I've started to live that way and reconnected with my higher power and relied on my higher power and had faith that, it'll all work out just the way it should. My life's been beautiful, and I think without a higher power, a God or something just bigger than you, a power bigger than you, I think it's hard to find direction in life, in general.
Yeah, Robert, what's your take on that and how it's so important to be able to rely on something greater than self in this process?
I really like Whitney's answer because it really brings everything down to God introducing himself to our humanity. We don't have to introduce him to us. He introduces himself to us. And the thing about a higher power, it's anything that you're comfortable with that can do for you what you can't do for yourself. So God introduces himself to you as Justin B, understanding every nuance of your need. He does the same thing for Whitney, understanding her age, her gender, her mindset, her circumstance, and he adjusts himself to fit her need. And then he does the same thing for me and every other person who is open to that concept of a higher power that I've ever met in recovery. So with that, that's the emotional side. And I want to let everyone who's new or relatively new in the 12 and 12, which is the commentary of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that Bill wrote and published in 1953, on the 11th step, which is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. It talks about how in the beginning, that higher power is the group. Because Justin, we're so tangible. Wouldn't you agree, Whitney? We're just a tangible people. If we can't see it, feel it, taste it, touch it, smell it, it's not real. Because we become so superficial. So in the beginning, even though I can't identify the power in you, Justin, I see what the power has done. And I gravitate towards people like Whitney because I think she's a freaking miracle. I need what she has. I don't know what she has, but I need that. And so I gravitate to the power that I love to be around her because her attitude, her outlook, and I like to be around you because the decisions you're making. And little by little, I become to believe in the intangible, which empowers me. And so that's the emotional side. The practical side is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, when I straighten out spiritually, the mental and the physical get well. And so the spiritual, because I have a spiritual malady, everything else comes second, just like sobriety. When I'm sober, everything else makes sense. When I'm not sober, my world is upside down. When I put my higher power first, then everything else eventually takes shape around what that higher power allows.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, I love this conversation. Now, this next question, I think we can pull right off of this. You know, the question is, why do I have to surrender? But I think what I want to dive into is, what do I surrender to? I mean, we're talking about our higher power. If that higher power is something that I can't trust, why would I surrender to that higher power? So let's talk a little bit about that and why it's so important to surrender, whatever that means, and to whom to surrender. Robert, what's your take on that?
Well, in the beginning, most of us, it says in the Big Book, chapter 3, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics, sex addicts, what have you. We are unwilling to admit, although we know the injury and the damage that it's done. So we get, as we used to say in Las Vegas, we get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Once I do step one, and it's universally true, I've admitted I was powerless over what have you, that my life had become unmanageable. There's a direct connection between my substance or my behavior that leads to the unmanageability of my life. And when I'm tired of that enough, because I don't change because I'm a good guy, I'm a good guy because I've changed. And so consequently, I have to be tired of the way I was living, the divorces, the losing the jobs, the losing the paychecks, the losing the apartments. I mean, at some point, you get tired of being locked out of your pay by the week hotel room, you know, and if you're not ready. If you're not sick and tired of being sick and tired, I mean, how much more did you have to lose, Justin? How much more did you have to lose, Whitney? I know I was tired of losing. And the only way for me to stop losing was to address the things that were causing me to lose. And that comes through surrender.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, Robert. Whitney, what is your experience? What does surrender mean, and why is it so important to do that?
Well, Robert kind of nailed it. I mean, it really begins with, if I look back over the course of my addiction, since I was 20, I've had different reasons and different motivations to try to get sober, right? And every time I would try, it was just, there wasn't enough, it didn't hurt enough yet. You know, there was always a way to go back out. There was always a reason I could just give up. And I can't tell you how many times, you know, I've tried to get sober over the last 20 years, but what it finally took for me is, you know, and I'd been through rehabs and I'd been through treatment centers, therapy after therapy, all different solutions, right? None of them worked for me. When I finally, and he said it, after you lose everything, you have to lose everything. And that's what happened to me. I'd lost my house, lost my job, lost my relationship, lost my family, lost everything, had no money, living on the streets, right? I mean, as low as it can get as far as standards, you know, and finally go to treatment and get some sort of solution. But I just wasn't, you know, I just didn't want it. I was so resistant, so not in the right mind to try to get sober, try to find any recovery. And so that first time through kind of just enlightened me a little bit that there is another solution, you know. But when I went back out and face planted, you know, and completely relapsed within, you know, a couple months. And that's when it hit me in the face. Like, okay, it's either this life and it's going to just repeat itself and hit you over and over again, or I explore this solution that I had a little bit of light in my life for a minute there, you know. And so I went back to treatment and completely surrendered to this program, just took everybody's suggestions, mimicked the people with success before me. And that's all it takes, because this program works the same for everybody. You know, there's no program for Whitney and there's no program for Robert, you know, or Justin. It's all the exact same program, and it works for every single person. And so why would I try to do it any other way, you know? But yeah, that's, go ahead.
You know, as I listen to you, Whitney, and to you, Robert, this concept becomes more and more clear in my mind. What am I going to surrender to? If I'm going to surrender to the alcoholism, however that manifests in my life, I'm going to lose everything. And I'm surrendering to it, thinking that I have control, thinking that I'm making these choices on my own. Or am I going to surrender to a power greater than self? Whether that power may look like, you know, those people, like Whitney said, hey, people in treatment who had what I want, who things were working out for them. And as I surrender to that, more and more light, more and more power comes into my life from that outside source. And I just, that vision of that was clarified further in my mind as you two shared that. Robert, do you have any follow-ups on that, that concept?
None of us believe that the 12 steps is the only path. However, it's the only path that's worked for me. Okay. Having said that, steps 4, step 8, step 9, and step 10, although they deal with morality, they don't align themselves, or step 1, which is the surrender step. So 7 of the 12 steps of recovery are about God. Step 2, step 3, step 6, step 7, step 11, and step 12 all directly align themselves with the progressive relationship that we have with a power greater than ourselves, culminating in helping others. And because of the amount of steps involved with a higher power, what makes me think that the recovery path isn't about establishing a relationship with our understanding of God? It would be like watching a movie or reading a book, and the highlights of the book, the synopsis of the book, and then we think the book is about something else. It doesn't make sense. So either I get on board with acknowledging God as we understood God and relying on that power to get me well, or I find another program that doesn't include that. And there's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that's wrong is we suffer from a treatable condition, and left untreated doesn't make any sense. Once we surrender to that condition, when I went to my surgeon and he said, I can give you more cortisone shots, but you have no cartilage in your knee. The next step is replacement. And I say, well, keep giving me the shots. And he said, well, it doesn't do any good. Well, keep giving to me, doc. Would that make sense? No, it would be, and then that's laughable, but that's how we are. So that's what I have to add.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. All right, so next question, I'm going to address this to you, Whitney, first. Why do they say that we aren't bad people trying to get better? We're sick people trying to get well. And I think we've talked about the disease. We've talked about the manifestation of that. We're not bad people trying to get better. We're sick people trying to get well. Whitney, what's your take on that?
I love that different. I mean, it's such a big difference, right? A bad person versus somebody that's just sick, right? It's the difference between being treatable and not being treatable, you know? Yeah. And it gives hope to the sick person too. And rather than just being, oh, smitten, you're bad, smitten, we can be treated. There is a solution for us, and like being sick is, I don't know, it's so much softer than being bad, it's not terminally, you're not terminally ill as bad, but, and I don't know what I'm getting at with this, but there's just a huge difference, with having a path, with having a solution, with having a way to get better, a way to get well, a way to find the solution, I don't know if you want me to elaborate more on that or.
Well, let's see what Robert has to say on a follow-up.
Yeah, let's see what Robert has to say on that one.
I want to see where Whitney's going, so I'll flip it back to her real quick. It doesn't mean we haven't done bad things.
Right.
But we've done bad things because we're sick. We don't do bad things because we're bad. And to not think we're sick is to disregard the emotional or the physiological component that something is definitely wrong with us, and something that's wrong with people prior, as Whitney said, to it being untreated causes me to do bad things. Again, it doesn't excuse me from the bad things I've done, but at least it explains and addresses it.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Yeah, as I listen to this and as I think about different ways that this is manifested in my life, that thought that, I'm a sick person trying to get well rather than a bad person. I was honestly resistant to that at first because, like I said, am I blaming someone else, this illness that manifests in a way that, it's not like it doesn't appear to be like a flu that comes in and I have no control over the flu and how long it sticks around. But I was resistant to that fact that no, if I'm sick, that's just me absolving myself of any responsibility for the actions I've taken. But there's so much more to that. Robert, can you take just another minute and explain that a little bit further so that, somebody who may be listening and saying, that's just an excuse that you're sick can better understand it?
Well, because it says there are those two who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. So when I presented, I didn't know that I was suffering needlessly until I came into a room of individuals who were recovering from a needless state. Does that make sense? And so once I related to them, and this is a shot, this is why we go to meetings. This is why we get a sponsor, because we need someone who's been where we're at, but yet not there anymore. We need to relate to them because we're only as sick as our secrets. And when I exposed the fact that I was addicted to pornography by the time I was 11, guys say, oh, yeah, so was I. I was always trying to look at this and look at that and trying to find something that would complete the puzzle that I felt was scattered and shattered across the room. And so it's I need to relate to someone so I feel relatable. Because when I'm out there alone, see, I went to a concert one time, and I use this as an example, with 100,000 people at the LA Coliseum, and I saw Jethro Tull, which dates me. This was back in the mid-'70s. And I'll never forget, I was so high. I was probably on mushrooms, smoking dope, drinking. And I was married at the time, to give you an idea of how bad, and my wife wasn't there. So here I was, as high can be, with 100,000 people. And just for a moment, I thought, I shouldn't feel as lonely as I feel. Why do I feel isolated when I'm with 100,000 people? And yet I felt like the only person in the room. That's how sick I became. And alone I became. Had every substance in me that I liked. Probably was with another girl that wasn't my wife. And with 100,000 people seeing my most favorite band, and yet there was a sense of isolation and a sense of loneliness that has to be addressed. And so once I admit once I admit that I have a condition, at that point I'm responsible to address it.
Hey Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, I like that final. Well, I like all that you shared there, but once I admit I have a problem, it's my responsibility to address it. Whitney, any other thoughts on this topic before we go to the next question?
Sure. I was just thinking, it took me back to when I got some education on this actually being like a disease. I was just like the rest of the world initially when, I had all this shame, and I played so much onto myself, and I took so much guilt on, which, I mean, it can be bad and good in both ways, but I wasn't enlightened to the fact that, hey, this is actually a disease. I was just like my parents are today. They didn't really understand that it was a disease, and as soon as that got like registered and I actually believed that, okay, maybe this is like, a disease. This isn't something I can completely control. Maybe I'm predestined for this. All that shame kind of lifted. And like Robert said, it gave me this opportunity to actually do something about it, because there was this education, there was, a way out, essentially. There was a solution that was way out in the distance for me, but at least I believed that like I could do something about it finally,
Yeah, it reminds me of, I heard this related, and the person who shared the story said it was from a play written by somebody, who knows how long ago. But in the play, it's about a person who is not doing well emotionally, mentally, and goes to a therapist, a psychiatrist, and says, "Hey, doc, is there something wrong with me?" And the doctor says, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, good, because that means I can address it. If it's not something wrong with me and it's the rest of the world that is a mess, I'm hopeless." And I think there's some power in that, in recognizing I've got an illness. There's something wrong with me, but it can be addressed. There's a solution. There's a treatment for it, and there's hope for it. And once I grasp that and I'm honest about it, and I'm no longer slave to my secrets, I'm no longer as sick as my secrets, because my secrets are something that I'm sharing, I have freedom and the ability to address it. Any other thoughts on that from either you, Whitney, or Robert?
No, Justin, I will only say that you've laid the basic foundation and the framework for the steps. It's why the steps are so important, because that fourth step, where we took a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves and then we shared it, it opens the door to me being honest with someone, an entity, and another person, that almost gives me permission to say, this is who I became. This is not who I am. But as a result of what I did, this is who I became. And I refuse to be that person anymore. I want to be this person. I want to be a person who is happy, joyous, and free. I want to be a person who insists on enjoying life. And no matter how long it takes me to build this new house, I'm going to build it. I'm tired of tearing my old house down.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. So Whitney, so Robert brought up something. Why are the steps so important? And I think he addressed that really well. But do you have any other thoughts on why the steps are so important? And can't I just work the steps any way I want, or should I follow the instructions the recipe is laid out?
Well, to answer that second part first, I've already, expressed how much I believe in this program and how much I believe the steps are in order for a reason. Why the steps are so important in my case, and I'm just going to go off of my experience. I was exposed to, a lot of recovery and I even hit AA rooms, back 10 years ago, but was only there to kind of support a friend, I guess. So I wasn't totally invested. But even now, when I entered the rooms, I get the support and I get the community and I get this whole enlightenment, but it's like, okay, how do I take this into my own hands? How do I take control of my situation? How do I start taking the next step, and literally the step. But once you finally, get a sponsor and humble yourself enough to ask for help and go to another person that's doing things right, their life is beautiful, they seem to walk with light about them, they have confidence, all these things that you're looking for in another person. That's when things change. You take under direction of somebody that's a pro, or at least experience the whole magic of the whole program, and they walk you through step by step. And every step you do, you get this boost, you get this confidence. And then once you're finally through, 4 and 9, it's like you blink and your life is just beautiful. Like the things you used to fear, you don't fear anymore. The things you used to walk around and carry the shame and the guilt, you've let go. You learn how to carry yourself. You learn how to speak honestly. It's a whole game changer. It changes your life in so many ways. It changes the way you react to life, the way you live your life. It's just a beautiful process. And I just, that's the glory of the program, is the steps. And so if you're really wanting to take control of your recovery and take steps forward, get a sponsor.
Yeah, and I think that leads me to this next question. I love that. Thank you, Whitney. When I first came into the rooms before I got a sponsor, I sat around and I looked around the rooms and I was like, if these bozos can do it, I can do it. Why do I need to pick somebody from in here to be my sponsor? Can't the meeting, or can't me just showing up be my sponsor? Can't I just say, hey, my wife is my sponsor, my God is my sponsor? Why is it so important to have a sponsor? Robert, let's start with you on that.
Just I need someone who knows everything about me. But I also need to be guarded. I need to be guarded and I need to trust, because where we come from, in one degree or another, if you knew where I was weak, then you exploited that. And so I need in the beginning to personally identify with one person to begin that process of being open and honest to everyone else. It's kind of like boundaries. In the beginning, when we establish boundaries, we're very close. We keep everything close to the vest because these are deep-seated secrets that we have kept hidden from everyone. And so my sponsor, who I trusted to his grave, was the only person that would recognize and would appreciate and I could trust with my deepest, darkest secrets, which were fears. And once I began to open that door and realize that doesn't hurt me, I mean, it doesn't mean that I went to the police and confessed every crime, or doesn't mean that I went to one of my wives and admitted everything, but it began to open the door to my deepest and darkest secrets. And as you said earlier, Justin, we're only as sick as our secrets. And the more what I did became less of a secret, the more well I became. There's a great correlation. Now, 39 years later, what do you want to know? You know, I'm an open book. You ask me a question, I'm going to give you, you may not like my answer, but it's going to be honest. And that only comes from the freedom of being able to share with one person. One person became two, two person became four, four became eight, eight became 16, and now it's a whole room. And Whitney knows me in meetings. I share everything as often as possible.
Yeah, so I think this is really important and really interesting, Robert. You said, hey, 39 years in, ask me. I'll tell you. I'll tell you anything about me. I've been working recovery for 12 years now, and I'm fairly close to that point. Hey, anything you want to know, if you ask me about it, I'll tell you. Whitney, talk about, you said tomorrow is 1 year of recovery. What is the importance of one being reserved in this, but two being honest? Do you see, what does that look like at 1 year?
Oh, I've worked my steps, so I have been able to kind of dig up all my, I guess, secrets and let them go and cycle through that process. At a year, I feel like maybe in a public setting, like a meeting, like Robert, ask me anything and I'll tell you. Maybe I'm not quite there yet. Maybe I'm still getting comfortable with being that exposed and vulnerable. But if I'm being completely honest, I know I'm just at a year, but I think I would be willing to talk about most things. There isn't much about my past that I fear anymore or that haunts me, that lingers. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it is just the process of the steps. And once you can get through those steps, it's, you're happy, joyous, and free. And it's just the way it is. And at a year, I guess there's still some stuff I'm figuring out about myself, even. Like I'm still just learning and growing into myself too. But as far as being honest with whoever I'm speaking to, that I have no problem with. So that's a blessing of the steps.
I love that. And you know what that shows to me, Whitney, is that as you've done this, the promises that are there in the big book are coming true. We no longer regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it.
100%.
If I'm a year in, 12 years in, 39 years in, and I'm still not willing to, and I'm still trying to shut the door on the past, and I'm still being dragged down by the past, maybe I haven't gone through this in a way that the freedoms are promised that we will receive those freedoms as we really go through that. Any other thoughts on that, Robert? And then Whitney.
I read between everyone's line, and I think if I was to speak on Whitney's behalf, she is talking about having a purpose for sharing. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's an end to her honesty. Her honesty needs to serve a purpose, because AA is not therapy. there's therapy. Recovery is not therapy, whether it's OA, SA, GA, NA, AA, whatever, HA. It's not therapy. So when I share my past, it's with it's with the consistency of what recovery brings. So if I share about my powerlessness, it's not just to brag or relive my past, it's to make a connection to my present. Mm-hmm. And so I'm honest for a reason, not just to say, well, I did this or I did that or I did the other. I'm more of an alcoholic than you, or I'm more depraved than you, what have you. There needs to be a reason for my sharing. So I agree with Whitney as the opportunity and the purpose, because I know, Whitney, we go into treatment centers, we share some really deep things that are relevant to the moment. Mm-hmm. We don't share them because we want to share and elevate ourselves. We do it on behalf of the newcomer that we hope to get well. Is that fair, Whitney?
Absolutely. You said it for me. That's perfect.
Love it. Love it. I'm not out there sharing a drunk log to say, hey, look how depraved I was. Look at that.
Yeah, right.
Exactly, Justin.
Good. All right. So let's go into one more question here before we wrap this up. What makes service to others so important? I mean, you just talked about going into these treatment centers and sharing some of the deepest, darkest things so that the newcomer can have hope. So why is service so important? Let's start with you, Whitney.
I love this question. So like I said, all the magic happens during the steps. You know, you develop into yourself, you get this whole spiritual experience, this whole ride of all these, just enlightenment. You know, you feel like you just, like they say in the book, you put on a new pair of glasses, right? And you get to the end of the steps, and the last step says, you know, okay, jump right into service. And I completely understand that part of the program, because now I'm living in that step. Well, I'm living in 10, 11, and 12 every day, but that service is what's keeping me sober today. You know, I'm so involved in chairing meetings and, you know, sharing my story when I can. And I work in a treatment center because I get so much joy out of service. And if I can bring, you know, it's probably a cliche to say, but like, if I can bring one or two or even just a handful of people the enlightenment that I've had in the last year, I mean, the greatest gift in the world, you know, and I've been able to witness that. You know, I have sponsees that I see, you know, going through the steps, and I see these little lights go on, and I see their attitude change, and I see their, you know, behaviors change even. And it's a beautiful thing to watch somebody come into themselves. And so you know, the steps were magic for me, but the magic of the program today for me is service and being involved in this community where everybody's just feeding off one another in the right ways, you know, and positive energy and bringing people up. And it's just a beautiful miracle to watch. And that's why I live in it today.
Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead. I love it, Whitney. I can tell that you are converted to recovery because you're giving it away. I love that. Robert, what's your take on this?
Well, thank goodness I'm involved in a 12-step program, not 11, because God does for me what I don't deserve. And his only expectation is I do for others what they feel they don't deserve. So serving others is my response to God serving me. Mm. And everyone deserves a response. when I think of all the things that God has done, you didn't know me. I did some really bad things because I thought I was bad. And God revolutionized my life. I've been married almost 36 years. As I told you, when we got there, I'm moving to Florida. I'm debt free. Everything I have is because of my response to God. And I will share this, how important service is, and I will close with this. When I was 6 months sober after a 71-day relapse, or 71 days, and then I relapsed for 5 days, I came back and I knew I was going to go back out again. I knew it. I didn't know why, but I knew that if I didn't add something to my life, I was going to go back, and I would never come back because my pride would not allow me to. And I went to my sponsor afraid, and I said, Jack, what do I do? Because if I go back out, especially in Las Vegas, it's like a pit you never recover from. And I said, Jack, what do I do? Because if I go back out, I'm never coming back. What do I need to do? There needs to be a magic panacea that'll allow me to stay sober forever. And he said, Bob, what you're missing in your life is serving others. He said, I've never known anyone actively involved in service who has relapsed. And the key word there is actively, and then service, active service, like what Whitney's doing, what you're doing, Justin, what I strive to do. And you know what? 39 years later, I have a friend who is 58 years sober. His name is Ed L. up in Boise. And you know what he's doing today? He's serving. I can call my sponsor, Slow Will, in Missouri right now, 45 years sober. He is serving. Everyone I know who's well, who insists on enjoying life, we don't insist on enjoying life because our life can be better. We insist on enjoying life so newcomers can see that there's hope. And when others see hope in us, that makes us more hopeful.
Man, I think that's just such a powerful concept. When I am, and I'm going to bring in some scripture into this. Jesus says to Peter, he says, when you are converted, strengthen your brothers. He doesn't say, hey, when you get it, kick back and relax. When you get it, keep it to yourself. He says, strengthen your brothers, strengthen those around you. Any thoughts on that? Robert, I saw you react to that.
Oh, guys, anytime you bring up the Bible, don't hold me, but I'm a born-again Christian, and I love the Word of God. There is... In Corinthians, it talks about the value of others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. And so Christ, if you believe it or not, that's fine. He came to seek and to save those who were lost. And we who are recovered, we seek those who are lost. And we guide them in spite of our misgivings, in spite of our fears, in spite of our time, in spite of our other obligations. We guide others to the freedom that we've been given, which allows us to be more free. And I was telling this to some individuals in a meeting the other night. If you want to feel good about you, then help someone else feel good about them. If you start out with you, you're going to end up empty. If I start out with others, I end up full. So it comes down to whether or not I'm tired of being empty. Because even Zig Ziglar, the great communicator, in his book, See You at the Top, says you want to be successful? Go find enough other people and teach them how to be successful, and you will be successful. And I think my sharing and my desire to help others get well, I think that has increased and accelerated my timeline of wellness.
Love that. Whitney, what are your final thoughts on service and what makes it so important?
No, I've just lived it enough. I mean, such a small amount of time to be doing service, but the amount of payback and give back and blessings that come from it, like it would just only encourage me to keep doing more of it. It's just the proof is in the pudding, and there is nothing better than seeing, kind of somebody that's kind of followed you and, maybe a sponsee perhaps, and to have them stand up and share their enlightenment and share their change, that kind of testify what this program has done for them, and give you some credit to that it's just a chain reaction that keeps growing. And I think really honestly, like, service in this program can, be the change we want to see in the world. Really, it can. And I'm just happy to be a part of it. I just feel so blessed to have been one of few out there on the streets that have, for whatever magical circumstance God had to wire into my life, like, I'm lucky enough to be on the end of his magic and his blessings, and I give complete credit to God and putting this program into my life when he did, and how he did, and with who he did. I'm just so grateful to be in this program. It saved my life. So to pass that on, I do service, and that's what I want to see. So.
Yeah, and I love what the big book says, and it says it in a couple of different ways, but the quote that I'm thinking of is, when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic saved the day. That's me giving back. And that's me giving back when all other measures are failing and I'm hanging on by my fingertips. I work with another alcoholic, and all of a sudden I'm on solid ground again, because I'm freely giving that which has been freely given to me. So grateful for that. Any final wrap up thoughts by either of you before we close this down?
Yes. Roman numeral 17 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says the strenuous work one alcoholic to another is vital to bring about permanent recovery. And you can say that about any addiction out there, whether behavioral or substance. The strenuous work one addict to another is vital to bring about permanent recovery. And you, Justin, and Whitney, we want permanent recovery, one day at a time for the rest of our life.
Amen. And thank you this morning. This is a morning recording we're doing, everybody. And I'm going to read one more line as I close this out. This is from the foreword to the third addiction. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Thank you so much, Whitney and Robert, for being that other alcoholic who is starting recovery today. It's sharing experience, strength, and hope. You've lifted me, and I know this conversation will help a whole lot of other people. Thank you for coming here. Everybody, keep coming back. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.